All right, everyone that's watching this in the future, I just want to welcome you to this as well as welcome Mr. Dean King to the Zoom. We're so lucky to have him. And usually I try and keep the introductions brief, but this one may require a little more time, so just bear with me. Mr. King grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and actually went to St. Chris, like all of us. He played lacrosse at UNC and won the 1982 National Championship while also editing the literary magazine and receiving his bachelor's in English, so he was very involved there. He later went on to earn his master's at NYU and wrote for magazines such as Esquire and the New York Times while also working as an editor for the Men's Journal. He now has published 10 books, so his story continues, and perhaps most notably his nonfiction text entitled Skeletons on the Zahara, which focuses on the survivor journal of Captain James Riley. And this text led Mr. King to the Sahara Desert, where he traveled over 100 miles by foot and camel to get an accurate sense of what his protagonist experienced, and we'll definitely delve into that later. He has written another famous book called Unbound, where he spent July of 2009 in China trekking the same land as his protagonist in order to gain more insight into the exact stories from which he was pulling. And now Mr. King has co-created the James River Writers, a nonprofit that promotes local authors. And he also frequently goes to schools and classes to discuss his work. And we're really, really lucky to have him today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to meet with me. I'm really looking forward to the interview.
Thanks for having me, Clayton. Happy to be here.
All right, so usually how this works is I have a few set questions that I'll ask you, and then if you want to add anything on at the end, that would be just fantastic. But I'm just going to start off with a pretty simple question. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, things like high school interests, college major, and your master's degree?
Yeah, you hit on a lot of them. At St. Christopher's, I played a lot of sports like I guess most people. I played football and lacrosse and really enjoyed the team atmosphere there. But and I loved history and English, I guess, in particular as classes. And reading was something I always really loved. So, if you're exploring careers and you want to be a writer or a journalist, there's no replacement for kind of voracious reading when you're young, because you just absorb everything you read, all those ideas, all that vocabulary, style that you read. So St. Chris was great at encouraging that, and I gained a lot. I don't know if you still read it, but we read the Hobbit and the Tolkien trilogy in seventh grade, I guess, and that was something that really captured my imagination. And I've loved book series ever since then. So I love reading book series, among other things.
That's fantastic. So would you say that The Hobbit in seventh grade was kind of the spark that kind of guided you toward or pushed you toward your love for writing and reading?
Yeah, I would say that was one. My mother and grandmother were really big readers too. So my mother would always take me to the library, and I'd get those. Used to have red covers, the biographies. I'd bring stacks of those home.
Right.
And so I think reading, there again, nonfiction biographies. I can remember, everything from Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, to all the Civil War generals and Florence Nightingale, all these different biographies, all these fantastic lives to learn about and to be inspired by, and to be sort of transported into different places, was something that was always really meaningful to me and really special.
That's great. To kind of further your point on St. Chris, I was just wondering what experience in classes helped set you on this course just throughout your high school career, even middle school, like you touched on The Hobbit. Anything in high school that also impacted you?
Yeah, well, I mean, we had a great English and history and social studies teachers, always. Ron Smith. There was a guy named George Squires who was there before him. And I really, I love the way, they would get in and deconstruct stories and look at how the authors put them together. And again, I always felt the learning. I love reading fiction, particularly, even though I write nonfiction. I think those kinds of stories where the world building and that sort of thing, pulling from all different elements of history and literature, and I found just very inspiring, and that creative process really sort of lit me up, and it made me want to do it.
Right.
That moment, I'll never forget sort of talking to Ron Smith about escaping into a book, and for me being transported. I very much enjoyed life in classes and sports at St. Christopher's, but having that sort of imaginary those imaginary worlds where you could go off and experience traveling to another time, another place, maybe being at war or on some great exploration, those kinds of things. What you could do with a book amazed me. And so eventually I came to realize that as a life pursuit, if I could do that, if I could provide that for another reader, that would be giving back, and it would be something that would be great to do.
And that explanation right now tells me a lot about the reason why you loved going to different places to kind of be in the book. It just says a lot. And I'm really glad that St. Chris was kind of the ones that helped you out with that. I'm really glad you brought up Mr. Smith, because I actually have him for this upcoming year. So that'll be fun. Senior year with Mr. Smith. Looking forward to it. I'm glad you had such positive
Absolutely.
things to say. And that kind of leads me to my next question, which was, you may have already kind of answered it within that, but who was your favorite English teacher at St. Chris and why? And if it is Mr. Smith, was it because he was the one that kind of taught you how to lose yourself in the book?
Well, I think I liked all three of those guys in particular that I mentioned. I don't know if I mentioned Liston Rudd. He was the one who had us read The Hobbit. And, after reading The Hobbit, I went on and read the trilogy and was just swept away by that. And I think the way that gets into your imagination, your emotions, and becomes a part of you is something that never leaves. So that was special. Ron Smith's passion for literature and his he's a tough teacher. He had that reputation then, he probably still has it now, but
Yes, sir.
that's a great thing. He really cares about the works, and cares about your understanding for them, and it's meaningful to get in there and wrestle with the concepts and ideas that are within. And so I think teachers who are passionate about their work. And I had 4 daughters who went to St. Catherine's, so I went to lots of back to school nights there, and I was always amazed by the passion that the teachers at both of the Saint schools have for their subjects. And those English teachers really had it. George Squires also had a special charm about him and love of literature that was very meaningful to me. Also, writing concisely was something that was big to Mr. Squires, and something that I really took to heart. That it's not how much you write, it's not how many pages you fill up and hand in. It's really how clearly you think. And having teachers like Ron Smith and Mr. Squires who value that thought process, was important to me.
Definitely quality over quantity. They still emphasize that all the time. And I'm really glad that you also brought up the relationships with teachers and how much they cared, because I'd come home weekly when I was in lower school, middle school, and high school. My parents would ask me the question of, what's your favorite part about St. Chris? And ever since about 5th grade, it's been, well, the teachers really care and they help you better yourself in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So that's one thing that's always been really special to me throughout my 14 years now at St. Chris. So I'm going to just kind of shift gears a little bit here. We're jumping ahead. Can you elaborate a little bit on your work with the New York Times and Esquire? What did these jobs entail and what did you learn from them?
So I went to New York City to enter a graduate creative writing program at NYU, and I got a master's in English there. But one thing, I'd been at Chapel Hill, which is, your leafy college campus. I don't know that I was particularly ready to go to NYU, which is very urban, and all our classes were at night, and people were coming from Philadelphia to the classes. And so it was very different atmosphere. And so I started sort of pounding the pavement and going to magazines and pitching ideas to write stories. So, I wanted to be a writer. The only way to become a writer is to write.
Right.
And so I freelanced for Esquire and the New York Times. I did have a brief job with the New York Times in-house, but I was writing for different publications. Men's Journal I wrote for. I was contributing editor there. So for me, the important thing is, I could have gone up there and, like a lot of people, I could have gotten a job working in a restaurant or whatever to pay the bills in New York City. But for me, it was important to write.
Right.
And, while I wanted to write books, just writing articles, learning how to write for an audience at any level, at any length is important. And so I wanted to practice, the art and craft of writing.
And one common thing that I've seen from all the people that I've had to these meetings is, to be successful, you have to work on your craft. And that's exactly what you seem to do. One of the main reasons I started this club was because there are a lot of guys who don't know what they want to do at our age, even though you did. But what's so special about successful people like yourself, especially in a profession that's so difficult to thrive in, like being an author, you really have to just practice, right? Like that is how you get better, is by dedicating yourself to practicing. So that's
Yeah.
another great answer. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's St. Christopher's is something you certainly learn all the time yeah, I keep going back to athletics because I did a lot of that, but it could be the choir, it could be theater, it could be all kinds of things. But, you come to work every day. And that's why having exacting, demanding teachers and coaches, it's the best. They care.
Absolutely.
They're working you hard. You want to be, if you're going to bother to do something, do it well. I would, the sports I played, I would go out, on weekends. I love doing it. I did things. I encourage people to pursue things they're passionate about and love to do, because that's what's going to motivate you to go out and practice throwing the lacrosse ball over and over and over, or writing sometimes stuff you don't necessarily want to writing for a newsletter or a magazine. I mean, magazine writing can be a lot of fun, but it's just practicing that craft always and trying to get excellent at it. I think, other things I learned there are being humble, having humility. When you join a team, it's everybody on that team, from the manager to the coach, to the captains. Everybody matters. Everybody's contributing to one whole. And I bring that to my writing too. While people think writing's a sort of a solitary thing, it takes, you have to have a good agent. You have to have good editors, researchers, sometimes copy editors. All these people come together to help you make your work better. And if you sort of honor those people and you approach everything with a certain, humility, you're going to work well together and you're going to do the best you can do.
I love that. Yes, sir. I could not agree more. Um, so for people who may be interested in kind of pursuing this career, what should they do in high school and college to give them the best chance of success? Whether it's classes or writing for the school magazine, like what would you advise as a person who's made it in the field?
Well, a cool thing about writing is that it can be in any other field. So if you develop an expertise at whatever you're passionate about, I keep going back to that. When I went to New York City, I was in graduate writing program, but I was out pounding the pavement, going to magazines and pitching ideas. And I found out that these editors are pretty smart and they have their fingers on the pulse. But if I could come in with something that I had researched, knew more about than they did, and that I was really passionate about and wanted to write about, I could do it. I could sell it to them because they could see that there was something that was inspiring me and they wanted a piece of that. So I encourage you to pursue whatever you're passionate about, develop an expertise in it, know a lot about it. I also sort of had an interdisciplinary kind of thing at Chapel Hill. I was an interdisciplinary studies major, which means, I did my writing, but I did a lot of American studies. I was very interested in figuring out, what made America tick, and studying American literature, American history. I think as long as you find something that really motivates you to work, and whether it's writing or something else, that's what's going to make you good at what you do eventually, is that you have a certain passion for it.
Yes, sir. And I think to your point about working as a team with the editors, if you are passionate about something, I would assume that they will say, well, he's passionate. He's more likely to work hard. This product is more likely to be successful. So your passion may have even impacted them to kind of take a chance on you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have to sell my ideas all the time. So when I want to do a book, I'm going out, I've got an idea, something that I'm like, I'm really interested in this. And I get in there and I start looking around, and I have to go to editors and say, hey, we need to do a book on this, and here's why. And having that, first of all, doing your homework, knowing all about it, being able to position it in the greater body of ideas in books is crucial. But really, for me to pitch a book to a New York publishing house is it's a business deal, and I'm taking something to them that ultimately we're trying to make a living doing, and so I have to pitch them on a business deal that they're going to find profitable.
Right.
And so I think, again, that's where that passion comes in. If you really believe in an idea, people feel it.
Yes, sir.
And it's something that I've been, at least relatively successful at, coming up with these kinds of book length ideas and convincing, editors that, hey, let's do a book on this and let's put it out in the bookstore, and people are going to be interested.
Yes, sir. So kind of jumping back to my last question, if you were to advise kind of 2 or 3 college majors for guys coming out of high school if they wanted to be an author, what would you recommend?
Yeah, again, I think reading is the most important thing you can do. And, if you've got to, you really be a voracious reader early on. Guys would come to me when I was in New York. I lived in New York City for 10 years doing this before I moved back to Richmond. And guys would come to me wanting to get into the fields. And sometimes I would work with them, and I could tell whether they had read a lot, because I could tell by their vocabulary, by the way they wrote, sentence diagramming, all that painful stuff you do in an English class. It's crucial, learning how sentences work. But you pick that up reading too. If you're reading Tom Wolfe, or you're reading Faulkner, or whoever you're reading, and you're seeing the style and of these different authors and what made them effective, you pick those things up and you incorporate all that, and that becomes part of your style. So, I mean, certainly literature, I think, is a great thing to study. But if you're really into history and you read the great historians, that's going to affect the way you think and write, and that's going to be invaluable to you. It's going to give you a whole world to work from. I love reading first-hand accounts of history. Richard Henry Dana's 2 Years Before the Mast, from the 1840s. He went around the Horn and saw California in its sort of primordial state before it was part of America, and shows that to you in his writing. And to me, that firsthand account of seeing California and also sailing in a tall, a square rigged ship around the Horn against, in these stormy seas and with ice on the rigging, and it was a life and death situation. That kind of firsthand history really motivated me to want to write about history, and to, as you mentioned, go to places when I'm writing about it, go to whether it's the Sahara or China, to bring in all those sensory experiences to, get the reader involved in the story.
Great.
So back to your question, literature, history for me was important, but if you're inspired by economics or business, I mean, you could go on to be a business writer, or any other science. There are a lot of people who write great stories about science and scientific matters and exploration and discovery. It's fascinating stuff, and if you develop a background in it, it will help your writing about it. So you can take it any number of ways. Journalism as well. At a certain point, people, I remember when I was coming through, were saying, "Oh, don't take journalism. You can learn to write." But I think there's a path through journalism. There are a lot of great writers who took a journalistic path, learned how to do inquiry, and how to write about it, how to take on daily tasks. And again, writing for a newspaper or a magazine, it gives you that practice day in and day out of writing for an audience and being critiqued and having other people, help you improve with your craft.
Right. So I'm just curious now, like let's say one of my peers or myself were to become an author, how would you describe the typical day-to-day of an author or of yourself, and if one even exists, because I know you do so many different things. If you were to kind of say, this is a typical day, what would you describe?
Well, writing is really a lot of thinking. And when you're putting words on the page, you're thinking and solving problems continually. So a lot of your time is going to be spent at your computer. Let's face it, it is to a certain extent a solitary thing. The trips I take are kind of the bonus. Once I've thought through everything that's been written on a topic and metabolized all that, you do ask that question, or you did in some of the questions you showed me. Before I go on a trip, before I go to the Sahara or China, typically I'll already have a manuscript with me, because I've had to work through everything that was, not everything, but a lot that was already thought or written about the topic, go through that, figure out what was important and valuable to me, what I thought was accurate, and bring it, update it for a contemporary audience. And then I have all these questions and things that I want to find out. But by doing all that, really it's the homework. It allows me to go to the Sahara and know what I'm looking for and pinpoint it. Otherwise, if you just dropped me off in the Sahara, I would be like, what am I doing here? What am I,
Yeah,
experiencing? But
exactly.
I had a
You have a
manuscript and I
purpose.
had questions. Yeah, I had guides to ask. I knew what I wanted to find out about my camels, because Riley told me his story back, in 1815, and, he fell off of his camel, and his guide said, "Hey, Riley, if you'd fallen off your camel, if you'd fallen off of a donkey, you'd be dead. But you fell off of a camel, you're okay. Camels are sacred beasts. You're not hurt. Men don't get hurt when they fall off of camels." Now, I read that in Riley in his memoir, and I thought, that's a funny thing to say. That's kind of curious. Well, I went over the Sahara, and the same thing happened to me, and my guide said the exact same thing to
Wow.
me in 2001. So to have the context already there, when that moment happened, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm hearing that more
That's
than a
crazy.
century later.
That is crazy. So the research does really make all the difference. That is incredible. I would have never guessed that that was true. Wow.
Yeah. So,
Um,
so yeah, back to your question is, there are books all around me, there are manuscripts and, stuff that I'm constantly going through. I spend a lot of time on the internet because you can get to libraries now, so easily, and get into the archives. I'm writing about John Muir, who, was a great environmentalist, and helped create Yosemite National Park and started the Sierra Club. I'm writing about him now. Well, all of his papers and letters are at a library in California, at the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. I've been there. I went there. I've been in the library, but I can access everything online.
one
And
does make it a lot easier. Sure.
yeah. Eventually, you want to go there and actually feel the manuscripts and look at them, and there are things you can get that way. But I can get every letter that he wrote, and I'm going through every one, and to get that firsthand material that I need for this new work.
Yes, sir. So do you have a personal favorite book of your own, or do you all kind of value them equally?
That I wrote, or
Yes,
one.
that you wrote.
Um, uh, well, I guess that they all have a special place in my heart. Skeletons on the Zahara, I guess, is a lot of fun, because it's just a good action story, from shipwreck to being captured by desert nomads to struggling to survive on the desert. It comes at you so fast. It was a ton of fun to write and to go research. I really enjoyed that. But my biography of Patrick O'Brien, I think, was a really formative experience for me. Patrick O'Brien wrote the 21 book Aubrey Maturin series, which is set during the Napoleonic Wars in the Navy. Navy warfare. It's about the relationship of the sea captain and his best friend, who was the ship doctor, and they go through all kinds of experiences. And the books are fantastic. I would highly recommend those. starting with Master and Commander, which is the first book. And there was a movie called Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, that Russell Crowe was in, that people might have seen. But I wrote about the author who wrote those 20 books, and he wasn't who he said he was. So I went to Ireland, and I went into the libraries, and I went to a cemetery, looking to find out about, his origins. And I went to the cemetery because the only Patrick O'Brien I could find that had some of the things he had said about his own life led to this cemetery. Well, Patrick O'Brien was still alive and well in France. And I'm standing in a cemetery going, he's not telling the truth.
Wow.
He doesn't exist under this name in Ireland. And so eventually I found out who he really was by going into the archives in London and finding out that he'd changed his name at a certain point. And so I worked as really an undercover, a private eye, kind of teasing out who he was and figuring that out, and then contacting his family and his friends and putting together this whole story that, the world didn't know. So that was a lot of fun too.
Wow. That's awesome. And I think you kind of answered this when talking about skeletons on the Sahara and what you just said. What do you enjoy more, the research or the actual writing itself?
I can't really separate those two processes because I never stop researching. Sometimes I'm still researching when the book's gone to press. I had to change part of the biography. I was getting letters, for one thing. Once it got published, it was serialized in a big London newspaper too. And I started getting letters from people who had known O'Brien from his younger years. And I had to add 1,000 words into the paperback version of the book because I got such great material. But so my subjects tend to be, sometimes there's a lot of material. For me, I don't do all the research and take notes and then write the thing. I'm researching and writing at the same time. But there are different phases now. I've completed a rough draft of my John Muir book, and it's 160,000 words. I've got to cut that down to about 110 or 120,000 words to get it down to about a 300-page book,
right?
Where I want it to be. And so right now I've got a first draft, and I'm going through it, and I'm trimming it, I'm tightening it up, but I'm also researching where I need to add in some new details and that sort of thing. So primarily though, I'm in that writing phase of researching, writing, and editing. They all merge. They're all parts of each other. The editing process is really the writing process. And at a certain point, I'll work with material. It'll take me 3 or 4 years to write a book. And so it's one story, and you can imagine you might get tired of the same story after 3 or 4 years, or get to the point where I don't want to look at this again. But having another purpose to go back in, knowing that I need to go in and cut this chapter down by 1,000 words, gives you a new angle to go in there and go, okay, how can I tighten this up? How can I say this better?
And it's kind of one of those things. I know when my family likes to go on runs together, and I know when we're running and it's like a super long run, it's just like hit the next goal, and you make new ones as you go. So I guess that's kind of what the chapter trimming serves as. It's just, once I hit this, that's a goal accomplished, but then we got to move on to the next one.
Right. Yeah.
And one follow-up I have to that is, you said that you had how many words? It was like 160,000. Is that right?
Right now it's 157,900 words. I know that because I'm trying to get it down from 160,000. It's
right.
Painstaking.
So you said you had to get it down to 120,000. So, 40,000 words right there. When you're at that big of a chunk, are you doing that yourself or sending it to your editor, or are you working together on it? How does that go when there's like a significant portion to cut down?
Yeah, no, my books due a year from now. So I have another year to hammer it down into place. And when I'm first going through the material, I'm putting a lot in. I'm being expansive, because I'm like, I might want that detail. I'm not sure. It's a process from the beginning to end. You don't know. You kind of know where the story's going, because for me, I'm writing history. It's nonfiction. So I know what happens in the end, but I don't know exactly what's going to happen along the way. If you knew every step of the way, that would get really boring. But
It
the
would.
way that it's alive is I'm going through this material all the time. I'm going, okay, here's what he thought there. Can't believe he said that. Or really, he did that? So I'm going through all this material, and I might encounter something at an earlier stage in his life that's interesting, but I don't know if it quite fits. But then 30 years from now or 10 years from now, whatever in his life, it comes up again. I'm like, wow, he's referencing that, so the first time through, I'm leaving a lot in. I'm leaving a lot of names in of maybe peripheral characters. A reader can only soak up so much stuff, right?
Right.
So at a certain point, I'll go through, and I'm doing that now as I'm going through some of these chapters, and I'll encounter a name. And this guy might have been a senator in 1900, and he played a role, a small role, and I will then do a search on my document. And if his name doesn't pop up again, I might take his name out and just say a senator did this, or because if you can only throw so many names into a book before a
Absolutely.
reader goes, I
I know.
can't
I know. I've
grasp all
read
this.
books before where I see like 10 names on the first page, and I'm like, this is gonna be interesting, So I'm glad you're cognizant of that. I think that's obviously you know what you're doing, but that's a great skill for me as a reader. So I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so can you tell the listeners on the Zoom a little bit more about your research process, specifically your work in the Sahara Desert and China? Just how long does it typically take? Like how long were you abroad? And are you writing like with your computer or simply kind of enjoying the experience and taking notes? Obviously you're working while you're there, but is it typing the book or just here are the broad notes that I need to finalize once I get home?
So with Skeletons on the Zahara, I wrote companion books to the Patrick O'Brian novels. So for 8 years, I wrote those 20 novels that are set. They're in square rigged ships, and so I wrote. The first thing I did was basically a dictionary encyclopedia of parts of ships and characters, real characters from the Napoleonic Wars era. And it's more exciting than it may seem, I think, in the end, because you're reading these books and they have really good plots, but you want to know what they're doing in the cross catharpins up in the mast. And
Right.
O'Brien doesn't tell you. He's just racing through the plot. But eventually, if you're going to read 20 of them, you're like, what the heck are they doing? What are those things? Anyway, so while I was researching those books, I was living in New York City. I was in the New York Yacht Club library, and I was looking on the shelf one day, and I found the captain's memoir. It said Sufferings in Africa on the spine. I thought, that looks interesting. I pulled it down, started reading it. It was the story of Captain James Riley being captured, shipwrecking on the west coast of Africa, being enslaved. And I was like, I can't not believe this. This is unbelievable. What a story. I went to the New York Public Library, and he had listed his crew. I looked up all the crew, and I found out that another crew member had written a memoir about the same shipwreck. And this happened in 1815. I also discovered that Abraham Lincoln said that he had read the captain's memoir, and it was one of the 6 books that made a big impact on him as a boy.
Wow.
And here
That's
it
incredible.
was, yeah, I mean, here I'd never heard of the story. And he mentioned it along with the Bible and Pilgrim's Progress and Aesop's Fables, along there with Sufferings in Africa. I'm like, I can't believe I've discovered this manuscript that nobody knows about anymore. And so it just the whole story really moved me. So I got both sailors' memoirs and discovered, went out and looked around. Nobody had ever combined them before. Nobody had written a book for a general audience about this story. And so I started doing research, on it, discovering anything I could about all the guys who were in the crew. There were only 11 men on the ship, but
Okay.
so I'd go, yeah, and they were from Connecticut. So I'd go to the Connecticut Historical Society and do research there, online or in person, and see what I could discover about these guys. I found out a lot of them were in the militia, and if you enlisted in the militia, they had to write you into the roll books, and they would list your height and the color of your hair. So Captain Riley didn't necessarily tell you those physical descriptions of the men, but I was able to go find those little details. I found out that they went to New Orleans on their before they went to Europe, and so I went and found out, what they might have been doing there. So I did all this research. I put together a manuscript, and then I went to Africa, And, so that I could ask my guides, I had a guide named Muhammad El Arab, who was a camel jockey instructor on the Sahara, who led me across the desert. So I could ask him questions about camels. For instance, Riley said that they drank camel milk, and they even drank camel urine to stay alive. All right.
Wow.
So, I could ask this guy, do people really drink camel urine on the desert? And he said, yes, they do. In fact, they drink the urine of pregnant camels because there are hormones in there. That's what that was actually what I surmised. But they would drink it for toothaches and stomach ailments. So, if I didn't know everything I needed to know about Riley, if I hadn't done
You
all
have
my
no idea what questions
research,
to ask.
yeah, exactly.
And
So, the same, I could tell you stories about Africa, I could tell you stories about China, but it'd be somewhat the same, even more so in China, because the culture was so different, particularly since that story took place. Well, it took place back, well, before the communists were in power, but in the 1930s. And so much I didn't know about China, but having read a lot of personal accounts of what I was writing about, I knew the questions I needed to ask. Again, it's the homework that makes that trip just invaluable.
right. And so I'm just curious about a lot of Captain Riley's statements. When you were asking people there what he had said previously, was most of it accurate, would you say?
It was actually mind-blowing what I discovered accurate. There were things that I wanted to go find that I couldn't because there are no maps of the desert. The terrain is constantly changing. The political situation there is unstable.
Right.
And so I actually was prevented from going to parts that I wanted to go to. But there was the moment where I fell off my camel, and the guide said to me exactly what Riley's guide had said to him. And when I read it in Riley's memoir, I thought, maybe he's, pulling our legs a little bit. Maybe he's exaggerating a little bit. But when it happened to me,
You're like, oh, he's for real.
yeah, it's for real. Everything, even the most far-fetched stuff that I thought was far-fetched, it's accurate. It just happened to me. Another great example of that was Riley explains that one of his men got sick, and to heal them, they heated up the Arabs heated up their knives in the fire, and they then scalded this man and scarred him, and his sailor was screaming, because it was so painful what they were doing to him. And Riley thought they were torturing him. He didn't believe it was their form of medicine. And when I read that, I thought, gosh, that seems, I don't know if I believe that. It's so horrible what they're doing. I don't know if I believe that. Well, I got in, my camel, we were on camels, and part of the time we were in Land Rovers. They were setting up camps. I got into a Land Rover one time with my driver, and I noticed he had 3 scars on his neck. And I asked him, how did you get the scars on your neck? And he described the exact same thing. He'd gotten sick. They had heated up knives, and they had
Crazy.
branded him, and I was like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe I'm hearing these stories. So yeah, it was a verification that I never thought I would have.
And how satisfying that you did all that research and then it was actually true and none of that was just kind of a boost, that everything really kind of came together. That's so cool.
Sure. It's one of the fun parts of doing, in terms of whether you're writing books or you're doing journalism, getting out there, having an idea, getting out there, putting your elbow grease into it, putting your mind to it, and getting results and combining all that on the page. It's very satisfying. It's fun.
Sure.
It's what's fun about this job.
I'm sure. So you mentioned, I think this is one of the most interesting questions I'm asking you today because it really mind boggles me how you do this. You mentioned you were in a library. It was in New York, right? And you saw the book about Riley and you just started reading it. How do you typically choose these projects? Is it just kind of random like that, or is there a method to it?
Yeah, well, so far it's been one thing has led to another, and I still read a lot. And so sometimes it's in the footnotes of another book. I'll go, wow, that's interesting. I can't believe, or there's a little mention of something. So I read the newspapers all the time. And I read magazine stories. and, see if there's something that deserves a book length treatment. So again, it really goes back to being passionate about something. If you're going to tell a story, if you're going to spend 3 or 4 years writing about something, you've got to be very, very interested in it. I mentioned I'd spent 8 years doing the companion books and writing a biography of Patrick O'Brien. Well, I had discovered Patrick O'Brien in the New York Times book review that called his novels the best historical novels ever written. And I
Wow.
thought, I love history. I
You're
love reading.
intrigued. Right.
Yeah, yeah. So I picked them up and started reading them, and I was like, oh, these are unbelievable, but people are going to want to know more. And I thought, well, as a first book, I was already working for magazines in New York City, and I thought, well, for a first book to prove to editors that I could do a book, how about doing this companion book? And we sold that to Henry Holt. I had an agent, and it sold really well. And they were like, well, how about another book? What do you got after that? And so I did a geographical companion book about where they were going, because it all happens, at the turn of the 19th century, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and the political geography was different, and there was a lot of exploration that it was going on and was still to come. So again, one thing led to another. Then I found the captain's book, and then it has kind of gone that way. I went out to Yosemite at one point, Yosemite National Park, and learned about John Muir. It was 25 years ago that I did that. And I kept that idea all along. It's like when I went into Yosemite National Park and saw it, it changed me as an American. I was like, this is a landscape that is magnificent. And it just, it was something that I then really wanted to learn more about, spend more time with, and then express my excitement about it, in book form. And John Muir was sort of came out of that. I then learned about John Muir and realized, well, he's a guy that I think people should know about. And it led to this book.
Yes, sir. That was my next question, which was now I know, but you're working clearly on the John Muir book. And you said that's due in a year. So how long will it take from when the book is due to when everything is completely finished editing and you can go ahead and kind of publish it?
Typically, a big publisher in New York City wants 1 year with the book. So from the time you hand in that manuscript to the time it hits the bookstore is a year, because they, you've already gone through a process of selling it. It's already sold to the publisher. They've given me an advance on royalties, which will pay for all this time I'm spending writing the book. They then get paid back out of the royalties, and I don't get paid again until they've paid out the advance.
Right.
So that's kind of how the business works. But they then, once they have the manuscript, then their marketing department has to go out and sell it to bookstores. They have to get it into bookstores. Their publicity department has to go, what's this book about? We have to sell it to the media to get attention for this book. So that's their business. And that's why I partner up with them. And that's why they get a big part of the royalties. They edit it, they print it, they market it, they publicize it. They do all that. They keep it in stock, and they do all the distribution so that I can be a writer.
Right.
And that's a partnership again, in a business deal that we do together. But and that's why they need a year. Also, the editor it'll take them a couple months to read this book, and they'll write up all his notes and give it back to me. I will then incorporate his notes any way I want to, do more research. I will not have stopped either. I'll keep working on it even after I give it to him, probably.
Yes, sir.
And then once we get to the place, the editor and I get to that place, then it goes to a copy editor. And a copy editor goes through the book with a fine-tooth comb. Every sentence, every phrase, if you repeated a word, 10 times within 50 pages, they'll go, they'll mark that and go, hey, you might want to change this word a few times, just to make it read better. And again, it's part of that process of a curated book, as opposed to sort of the purely independent, writing a book and putting it up on Amazon. It's a very meticulous process. They don't take books lightly. To get them to buy that book, I've handed in several chapters already, and a synopsis, and probably a 40-page proposal to get them to want to be my business partner on that. But anyway, so it goes through this very exacting process, and we'll have done, all the photo editing too, to give that visual part. We'll do maps for the book. All that happens in that period of a year. At the
Yes,
same
sir.
time, I might be starting up my next book, while I'm
Right.
doing that.
So it's kind of a continuous process. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
One other thing I'll add in
yeah, go
is
for it.
I've started working on documentaries, because this nonfiction book writing and documentaries are kind of hand in hand as well. When I go on these trips, I will try to do something for a magazine. Hopefully a magazine will send a great photographer along. I might take a videographer. So I'm collecting intellectual property when I go to Africa or to China, all along. And there are various ways to use that intellectual property, whether it's in a book or on the screen. You can do a screen project to promote your book. You sell film rights to your book, and having all that intellectual property, there's value to it.
Right.
So I've got files of material, and it could possibly naturally lead to documentaries. Another nonfiction book writer who's a good friend of mine and I we've partnered up to create a documentary business,
Oh, that's so cool.
to do things for History Channel, Discovery, Netflix, that kind of thing.
How recent is
Um,
that?
Really, it started during this kind of time of COVID with some extra time on our hands. Um, History Channel did a 2-hour special documentary based on skeletons. The movie rights of that sold to Steven Spielberg.
Wow.
So all my book properties, I try to do that, and so does my friend. He currently has a show called The Last Alaskans on Discovery Channel, which is run for 4 seasons. So we know producers, we know how the shows come together, and really we're on the front lines of the history. We can find these projects and take them to, we call them upstream producers. They're closer to the networks, and we can work with them then to do to put together projects to sell to the networks. So we have probably about a dozen projects in some state that we are now working with producers to take to networks.
That's really, really cool. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about that in the future. So obviously, writing and being an author it's incredibly challenging to break through. Is this a profession that you would recommend? I know you mentioned you had 4 girls. Is this a profession that you would recommend to them?
You know, it's sort of almost a cliche to say, hey, don't do it unless you have to. But there's an element of truth to that. It's a if you're not working for an employer, you don't have health insurance, that sort of thing. It's a tough way to make a living, to be honest. So you've got to really want to do it. It's got to be something that you almost can't stop yourself from doing. And my daughters have seen me doing this. My wife's also an editor,
Yes, sir.
so she's involved in this. But we have books around. We're passionate about stories. We talk about a lot, and it's in their blood as well. So they do write, and I would never discourage anybody from doing it, because I think it's fun, it's exciting. It's one of the things that I really love doing in life, and that gives life meaning to me, and that I've found a lot of value in, whether reading or writing. So I would recommend it to anybody who really has a burning desire to tell stories and to learn more about all aspects of the world and life, and to make meaning out of life. But being a standalone author can be tough, but it can be done.
Right.
I'm by no means a superhuman, super special guy. I'm just a guy who works hard, is passionate about it, and has had a lot of advantages and opportunities being able to go to great schools and have those experiences. So I would encourage people to do it who feel like they really want to do it. It's not an instant way to get super wealthy.
Yes, sir. And my final question of the day, I usually finish with a fun one. I, as a diehard Tar Heel fan, love the fact that you were not only able to represent the university, like now with regards to your writing, but also the Lacrosse National Championship. Can you just tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I went down and joined a lacrosse team that were the undefeated national champions when I was at St. Christopher's playing. And so my freshman year, we were again undefeated national champions. And I was, of course, the low man on the totem pole. But it was what I experienced at St. Christopher's in that fight to be excellent, but to do it with integrity.
Right.
The mens sana and corpore sana, that kind of sound mind and a sound body, doing it for the right reasons, for the love of the game, doing it with sportsmanship and having, perspective on it. I found that down at Chapel Hill too. I found a coach that even if I wasn't a top player on the team, the fact that I went out to every practice and could lead the team in the distance runs because we'd done that at St. Christopher's.
Right.
That coach appreciated that immensely. It's like, if you can bring that to my team, if you can make the other guys run harder because you're running hard and they don't want to be shown up by a freshman, that kind of thing, just the littlest details, the attention to all those details,
right.
From the manager to everybody out there, every practice player was important to him. And consequently, I ended up getting a letter and a national championship ring, all that kind of stuff that comes along with that, and I worked hard, and, and having that kind of appreciation was super valuable to me as a life lesson in everything you do.
Absolutely.
It's the way you treat all those people that contribute to whatever you're doing becomes part of what you're doing, and it shows eventually, and is part of doing things with, I guess, integrity and value.
Yes, sir.
So anyway, I had a great 4 years at Chapel Hill. It gave me amazing opportunities to play on a national championship team, to then become the editor of the literary magazine. I met my wife there, and two of my daughters are there now. So, it's a special place for me. You can ask anybody. I'm one of the world's biggest Tar Heel fans.
Yeah,
I don't miss a hoops game, and get down for a lacrosse game whenever I can, that sort of thing.
Fantastic.
So yeah, it's really, it's been invaluable, great experience. And, I get it all from all my Wahoo fans here, but that's great. It's a good part of life.
Me too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all the questions I had for you today. Cannot thank you enough for taking the time to be with us. And I really, really enjoyed getting to know more about you and your life as an author. Thank you so much, Mr. King.
Thanks a lot, Clayton. Enjoyed being here. Good luck with your senior year. I hope we get this COVID thing behind us and that your spring's, better.
Yes, sir. Me too. Best of luck on your new book.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for joining us. Have a good one.
Okay. Bye-bye.